We had the Secretary of State for Scotland talking about funding delivered by the UK Government. Indeed, the honourable gentleman, the member for Bamford-Buchan, spoke about a number of other UK policy decisions and certainly read out the cost of them. I thought it was interesting, though, because it was almost like it was discretionary largesse from Whitehall, almost ignoring the fact that Scottish individuals and businesses don't pay tax. It's almost as if they don't realise almost every penny is borrowed, and the Scottish taxpayers contribute their full share to the debt repayment costs. And I find this extraordinary. And we heard other talk during the day about debt and the debt Scotland might have. The Scottish Government cannot borrow. It has no debt. All of the debt comes from the UK. The UK borrows all the money, no matter where it is spent. Whether it's a £500 million overspend on a single tube station, we pay our share of that debt. The reason I mention this, there is no union dividend. We then heard the Secretary of State make some extraordinarily disparaging remarks about education. Scotland has the highest proportion of people with a tertiary education. The best educated country in Europe. Instead of talking it down, why don't we celebrate the pupils and the students, the teachers and the lecturers, the schools and the colleges and the universities? The best educated country in Europe. He then went on, he must have been having a really bad day, to talk about crime. We've got the lowest... he's come in. Welcome, Governor-General. Take your seat. Scotland has the lowest crime rate since 1974. In England, it was reported in the last week, barely 5% of reported crimes in England even have somebody charged. To talk down the criminal justice system in Scotland while allowing that utter failure of the criminal justice system in England to go by the book is absolutely disgraceful. We then had the bizarre sight of the Better Together parties, the Tory-Labour coalition parties, pretending to dislike each other. When I see Labour's immigration mugs and their Make Brexit Work slogans, all I see is a red Tory, blue Tory, doesn't matter, they're exactly the same. We then had, I might not even get to my speech proper, Madam Deputy Speaker, we then had some straw men thrown up about how much Scotland's foreign currency reserve would have to be when we become independent. I checked. I checked, actually. The UK's foreign currency reserve is 6.4% of GDP. Ireland's is 2.7%. Finland's is 7%. Now, to be fair, Denmark is higher at around 20%, to be fair. How can it possibly be that a modern advanced economy with huge natural resources and a balance of trade surplus like Scotland would somehow uniquely be expected to be holding 50, 60, I think you spoke enough earlier on, 50, 60, 70, 80% of GDP in foreign countries. Of course I'll give way to my... Of course I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm very, very grateful to my honourable friend, and I'll see you later. But can I... he's making a very powerful speech, but it's probably worth pointing out to the House that the UK has a current account deficit of more than 8% of GDP. If it's a country that can't pay its way, it's the UK.
This is absolutely true. You know, there will come a time when we have the referendum next year, when we can enter into proper and calmer, sensible debates looking at the minutiae and the technical detail regarding all this, and long may that continue. Basically, what we saw today, Madam Deputy Speaker, was a rerun of Project Fear. Project Fear 2. And before I do move on very briefly to what I'd prepared, I was struck by the comments from the honourable gentleman, the member for Chesterfield, who is also no longer in his place. At one point, he genuinely seemed to suggest that the determination as to whether or not Scotland should have a referendum should be based on opinion polls rather than real votes. I'll take 7, 8, 9, 10 mandates in a row over an opinion poll any day of the week. Anyway, I mentioned a project for you too, and it took me back to the 2014 independence referendum. And the Yes campaign, I think, was characterised by one thing. It was the absolute determination to answer every question, to provide as much information as possible to the people of Scotland. And we did this in the face of the constant refrain from unionism that there wasn't enough information. Even when detailed answers to every question were tripping off people's lips, still we were asked for more. And we tried to ensure the answers we gave, the future shape of the Scottish state, the policy for an independent Scotland, were to the best of our ability in the best interests of the people of Scotland and those in the rest of the UK. And nowhere was that clearer, actually, than in our proposals for what was then a formal shared currency and our determination to serve as a negotiated share of the UK's national debt. Both plans actually designed to protect sterling and stop the rest of the UK falling victim to a technical default on its debt obligations. And in order to provide that certainty, that clarity, that detail, we drew, if not exclusively, certainly very heavily on the 670-page Scotland's Future White Paper. But we need to recognise unionism behaved, or the way unionism behaved, and campaigned differently and smarter this time. The first thing to recognise is, no matter how detailed and precise our answers were, unionism continued and will continue to ask the same questions over and over and over again to give the impression there are no answers. It was false then, it's false now. Secondly, we need to recognise unionism acted and continues to act in an irrational way. So next time, next year, whatever policy decisions are finally determined to be best for Scotland, they must not only be technically robust, they must be politically bomb-proof as well, which means no Indy Ref 2 policy area can ever be held hostage by a Westminster veto. And thirdly, of course, while we must answer every question which the public put to us, we should make our fundamental case on principle and not detail, and that's why the first 3 papers published by the Scottish Government are first class. A mix of democratic principle and a vivid picture of what Scotland could be is hopeful, upbeat, and takes Yes campaigners away from the miserable drudge of unionist whitaboutery that we saw in spades today, which so characterised the 2014 referendum. And one final thought at this point. We know how successful Scotland can be. Isn't it time unionism was finally challenged? Beyond Brexit, is this really as good as it gets? The first thing we have to do is to deliver Scottish independence, and second, in many ways, more importantly, describe the kind of Scotland we seek. Now, we've laid out the mechanism by which we'll deliver it. We've gone to the Supreme Court to test the legality of the referendum, and we've a wonderful fallback position that the next Westminster election will be a de facto referendum, meaning the Scottish people's voice will be heard one way or another. But to answer that second question, what sort of Scotland will we deliver? Well, the answer to that is actually implicit in the motion. Our critique of the botched, experimental Tufton Street economics which crashed the economy in the mini-budget is stark, and our demands for action to help those most in need is clear. But let me end by answering the question, what sort of Scotland do we seek, in a slightly more succinct way? The Scotland we will deliver will be the one the people of Scotland want and choose, because it's with independence and only with independence that Scotland will always get the government and the policies it votes for.